Following the failed Voice to Parliament referendum last year and some of the racism that was in parts of the campaigning and that emerged throughout the year, there's been a big conversation here at the 2024 Garma Festival about racism and about the future, particularly about ways to navigate some of the intractable issues affecting our country. The new Race Discrimination Commissioner is here. Commissioner Giridharan, thanks very much for your company. I wonder what your observations have been in the 5 months that you've been in this role about the way that we grapple with racism in Australia.
It's really hard to grapple with racism sometimes in Australia because the person that calls out racism often gets attacked far more than the racism itself. But every time we have ruptures in our society, whether it be COVID, where we saw anti-Asian racism, the referendum, anti-First Nations racism, the conflict in Gaza, anti-Semitism or anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian racism, what that shows is whenever there are ruptures in our society, racism just seeps out. And that means that structurally we have problems that need to be rectified. And one of my key objectives is a national anti-racism framework. And I think what we see shows the importance of that framework.
And just here at the Garma Festival yesterday, the Northern Territory Police Commissioner issued an extraordinary apology to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Territorians about where there has been mistreatment from police over the last 154 years. How did you receive that apology? How did you hear that?
I was here, and I was glad to be here to hear it on these lands, and it was very powerful to hear. And the way in which it was introduced and the mongrel that it took place afterwards were powerful. And so I was grateful to hear it. But of course, words are words and they're powerful, but actions are what really make change. So it will now be the what next. What kind of systemic change will we see as a result of this apology?
And that would clearly be the work around anti-racism, which we know that Leanne Little will be launching into that work, an anti-racism strategy for the police, as well as broader targets around employment. Did what you hear yesterday go far enough for the sort of change that you think is required?
I think the mentioning of anti-racism was, or an anti-racist approach was really important. That's a significant step. But what you have to do now is you have to take action that will also involve current serving officers. It can't just be about historical acts. There'll need to be an internal review of the force itself, an anti-racist review. But as a starting point, you have to build racial literacy within the force. You have to get members of the force to understand how race operates, how it affects their actions, how it affects the way in which they treat people. No race is inherently bad. So why is it that some races and First Nations in particular in the Territory are so grossly overrepresented in the justice system? That's as a result of structural racism. That's as a result of effectively processes that are built up during colonialism, then baked in during the White Australia policy, and now there's an attempt to change. But it has to be a really significant structural change if it's going to work.
Commissioner, I've already heard mixed reaction from inside the police force, some who welcome it and say that this is a step in the right direction, others who are questioning it, and some who are quite dismissive, in fact. There's also been a lot of commentary on social media, some of it quite racist, aimed at those that have been leading this. Is this just what we see now when these conversations, these apologies are issued?
Sadly, we often see this torrent of vile racism, particularly on social media, where people aren't accountable for their actions. And there is a role to play for the social media giants in holding people accountable and taking better measures. But again, it's that same point that I mentioned earlier, that when you try and call out racism, you just get attacked, and you can get attacked from all angles for it. So it does take real courage to call it out, and in that sense I commend the Commissioner for doing so. But then the courage will be in seeing it through, that despite the attacks, knowing that this is absolutely the right thing to do, to take an anti-racist approach, to take a systemic review of the force and its actions and the way in which it impacts on negatively racialised communities, but particularly First Nations communities, as he mentioned yesterday.
And just finally, Commissioner, and more broadly, we are having national conversations about truth-telling and treaty. Do you see those as having a role in the work that you're calling for and doing around anti-racism?
Oh, absolutely, because calling out racism is calling out the truth of what is happening around us. And so the truth-telling is significantly important as a step. You have to acknowledge the racism that exists, and that is talking truth to power, talking about the racism that exists first and foremost. So you have to name the beast to slay it. If you just pretend it's not there and talk about diversity or social cohesion without first acknowledging racism, you'll never get to the cohesion. You have to grapple with and defeat the racism first.
Race Discrimination Commissioner Giridharan, thank you so much for your company.
Thank you.